leave it as is.
This video, these new producers are lame as F asterisk times 3 from Roro. Shout outs to this guy. Really cool shirt. Nice little bass. I can relate.
Hello, Internet. If you're a music producer and you take a loop from Splice and put it in a project file, leave it as is. Take a drum break that you found, put it in a project file, leave it as is. Is that your beat? Are you an artist? Are you a music producer? I would say
It's my style, bro.
it's complicated, you know? I think something like taking a Splice loop, putting it in a project file, a lot of people would say that's not really beat making. You know what I mean? But if you were to take a vinyl record, record an 8-bar loop, put it into a project file, and then somebody raps on it, you're a godlike producer, you know? So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in the realm of making beats, and I think there's a lot of valid opinions on both sides. So I kind of wanted to just talk about that today. So when I first started making beats, this was like early 2010s, there was a bit of a revival of like kind of 90s boom bap music production with like vinyl samples and like kind of swinging drum grooves and stuff like that. You know, like Jay Dilla, Stones Throw Records, Pro era, Joey Badass, like that kind of era. And it was basically not allowed for you to sample stuff from YouTube. And that's something that I would do often with my friends. But it was sort of like a taboo, you know, like people
I
didn't
kind of
really
remember that.
think that that was like acceptable in like the real music producer scene. But I did it anyway. And there was even times where I would
Yeah, I remember feeling weird about telling people I got samples on YouTube.
sample something from YouTube, run it through a cassette, and then resample it into my beat, just so that it would sound like I got it from a cassette or like some analog source. But it's like I was just ripping stuff
He's a
off
deceiver.
YouTube. You know, a lot of people do that. And I think the modern version of that is just people using splice loops, because sampling from YouTube is just normal now. You know, no one really questions that. But something like a loop pack or like a splice loop, people hear that and they're like, oh, this is, you know, I recognize this loop from this pack. It's like one of the most popular loops on Splice, and now it's in like a Billboard charting song. That's not really fair. But it's like the same people 15 years ago were like, oh, this record has been sampled so many times. Like, this producer doesn't know what he's doing. So I think just as time progresses, as technology advances, as the culture changes, people's perspectives change, right?
Yeah.
I think if you're a new producer, as a new producer, especially if you have no background in music, it takes such a long time to make something from scratch that like sounds good, that's like acceptable, that you enjoy listening to. So a quick way to get to that point is using loops.
I definitely agree with that, because there was a time when most of the beats I sold were like beats where I had loops. And, you know, it's important to kind of like reverse engineer that. You know, it's not because of the loops that those beats were doing better, but it was something about those loops, and then you figure out what it is about those loops that make those beats better, and then you kind of start picking, not necessarily picking those kind of loops, but more so just paying attention to different things more than just like what you think sounds good, what you think, you know, oh, if I just put some drums over this real quick, it'll be sick. You know what I mean? And I also think it's important that when you're starting out to get that practice out of the way, you know what I mean? Knock out, you know, download a sample pack and knock out like 100 beats, and then, you know, or however many beats, doesn't fucking matter. And then kind of go back and see which ones you like the most, you know, and just kind of dissect it, you know what I mean, and see where you're at. It's definitely important to get those reps in, and like the easiest way to do that is definitely with like a splice pack, you know what I mean, with a bunch of loops in it. And yeah, I think if like you can get good using splice, like, but yeah, you're not good for using splice. I don't know if that makes sense. Um, I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't like take full credit if you're using only splice loops. It's just lazy, you know. It's just lazy. That's all it is.
So for me personally, I wouldn't use splice loops for my beats, but I'm also not going to be upset with a new producer who's trying to learn how to make beats and just wants to make something that sounds good.
True.
And at the end of the day, if you're making songs, as long as it's a good song, it doesn't really matter how you made it. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really make a difference.
It doesn't make a difference to the
But
listener.
I do
You know
think
what I mean?
there's just
Like, I think that, oh, holy shit, bro. Check it out. If you zoom in on his desk, we're LED light twins. Fuck, I forgot what he was saying.
it's just a different game now.
Oh yeah, it does make a difference. You know what I mean? Like, and it should make a difference, like, to you as a producer. You know what I mean? Like, you should feel like kind of weird that like, oh, all the beats that I make with splice loops are doing, you know, more people want to use those beats, or those beats sell more or get more play, whatever metric you use to judge yourself. You should feel a way that, like, oh, these splice loops, like, they're making me good and it's not me, you know what I mean? Especially if you're just looping or whatever, versus like the kind of beats you make when you kind of find the loop yourself or you're playing the melody. Like, you should feel a way, and you should use that to kind of push you to get better, you know what I mean?
You know, like, I really like composing. Like, I have like a classical music background. So I'm of the mentality of I like to compose as much of my music as possible. With that said, I do enjoy sampling too.
Yeah, you
but
look
I
like it,
consider
motherfucker.
sampling like a different art form than
Yeah,
composing.
for sure.
You can it's all a matter of perspective. This is just how I perceive my own music. But I do think that there's something to art versus business, you know? Like, if you're getting into music to make money and to make, you know, make it a business, then you're not really going to be maximizing your potential if you're sitting making all your own
Yeah.
beats.
Are you potential maxing?
That's not going to take a longer time. It's not going to be like optimal for business because it's going to take more time. There's more factors, you know. It's harder to make something from scratch that people like as opposed to just something that you know people already like. I think that's also like why sampling old songs in pop music now and like popular rap music is so, it's like the meta right now because people just want to hear something that they already like. It's like
That's how it always was.
we're in
though,
like the
bro.
Marvel movie remake era of hip hop right now as far as pop stuff goes, like radio hip hop. That's kind of where we're at. And I think that, you know, people can be upset by that, but it's like it's the music industry.
I don't know about that. That might have been how it was for like a little while. I don't think it's really that anymore. You know? I don't know.
It's pop radio. Like, what do you really expect? You know, like if you're looking for like substantial art in music, you shouldn't be going to pop radio in the first place. So it's like, let those people do their
True.
thing. Who gives a fuck? That's my mentality.
Here's how the average man's life would change if he never saw an ad again. Day one,
Oh,
he
man.
would install Pi on his computer without...
But yeah, as far as like using loops and people being late, like people are like, oh, producers are lazy. I think that there is some truth to that, but I also think that people just don't really know what they're doing. You know, like I have friends that are like in the music industry and they're very talented, but they're around people that have no idea what the fuck they're doing, but they're
Yeah.
successful because they're good at business. You know, like in order to succeed in the music industry, a large part of it is just being good at business. You know, like the music is not even like the main thing necessarily. But for someone like me, I care a lot about my art. I care a lot about the art that I make, and I want it to be personal and an expression of myself. So it's kind of hard to do that using other people's music. You know, and that's sort of why I've gravitated away from
Bro,
sampling.
yapping.
Again, I love sampling. I got my start making beats sampling records. But I'm not going to like go around to new people and be like, you're not a real producer because you don't, you know, do what I think you're supposed to do. I think that that's stupid and pretentious. And, you know, it's one thing to like, I'm not even like anti gatekeeping. Like, I think gatekeeping has its place and is valuable. But for me personally, I just don't really care what other people are doing. You know, like if you're getting mad at somebody else being successful because they used the splice loop in their song and it blew up, it's like, you're just mad at yourself for not doing the same thing. You know what I mean? It's like, again, when has this shit ever been fair? When has this shit ever been like all?
But like you could use the same splice. It kind of goes with what he was saying. You could use the same splice loop, but if you don't know that artist, you don't know the manager, you're not in the studio session, it doesn't make a fucking difference because the guy who was there who used the loop is gonna get the placement. You know.
All about making good art, you know? But again, you can use a loop and make a good song. It doesn't matter. So
yeah.
I think that people forget that music is art, and a lot of people think of music as just business and a way to make money. And, you know, those people are going to exist no matter what I think, no matter what anybody thinks. So I don't
Yeah,
really see the
true.
point of getting all that mad about it, you know? If anything, if you hear a song that you like and then you almost feel like you got duped because it's a loop, you're like, oh man, I really liked the song, but now that I know it's a splice loop, I don't like it. It's like, well, maybe you should focus on making music that's better then. You know, don't
Yeah, true.
don't hear that and get upset about it. Hear that and be like, this is motivation for me to make art that's good. This is motivation for me to make a song.
And you know, people have seen me on the channel. Like, I'll use splice loops on the MPC, but I don't ever like just loop it and call it a day. I always chop it up and like try to do something with it. You know, just because for me it's lazy. Like to my standard, it doesn't. You know, it doesn't kind of. You know, reach my standards or whatever the fuck. Live up to my standards. Like I don't like being lazy in production.
Song that's actually good that I wrote and I composed. You know, whether you're producing yourself, working with a producer, working with an artist like a rapper, singer, whatever it is, just make the best art that you can make. Just ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And for some people, this might be a hot take. For some people, in order to make the best art that they want to make, they have to use loops, at least at the time. You know, like maybe down the road, they'll learn more about scales and keys, keyboards, and like chord progressions and melodies, and then they'll start writing their own music. But if they don't, who cares? It's not for everybody. It doesn't really make a difference. You know, like I'm a big fan of The Alchemist and that style of production, like the sort of like drumless loops, you know, whatever. But a lot of times those dudes are just ripping a 4-bar loop from a record and looping it and then maybe pitching it up a little bit. You know? And you could argue that like, yeah, but they had to find the record and they had to dig and they had to find the spot on the record that was good and loop it, and having an ear for sampling is an art form in itself, which I agree with all of that. But that's not really accessible in the modern day. You know, like vinyl records, sampling vinyl is sort of a niche thing. It's not something that everybody's going to be doing. And I think that's okay. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm just some white dude rambling about my thoughts on hip hop production. So I totally understand if you don't care about what I'm saying. But if you watch this far in the video, you must care.
No, I mean what makes the whole Alchemist thing special is that like he actually did it. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of producers who will find a really good loop, and instead of kind of like just doing a few things to it and making it like cool and good enough to rap on or whatever, they kind of like throw a bunch of other shit on it. You know what I mean? And that's part of knowing how to sample too, is like knowing when to stop and like kind of, you know, bring it back a little.
So, you know, maybe watch some other videos I made.
Yeah, we'll check you out, dude. I'll subscribe. Shout outs to Roro, man. 2,000, almost 3,000 subs, man. Shout outs to you.